Kotov did not become the world champion, but Kotov was top 5 at some point. So this destruction of Kotov, and of course everyone is allowed to have a bad game, but this destruction of Kotov was just like remarkable. And it was like a positional game, but a tactical game all at the same time. So we're going to look at that. So e4 was played, c5, we have Sicilian, knight to f3, pawn to d6. So at this point, most players go d4. And that leads to what we call the open Sicilian. And from this particular position, black can play in several different ways. Knight f6, g6, that's the dragon. Knight f6, knight c6, that's the classical Sicilian. Knight f6 and e6, the Shawinigan. There's so many ways to play this position. But Lilenthal played a move that I am pretty fond of, and that has been gaining in popularity over the last decade, is the move bishop to b5, the Moscow variation of the Sicilian. And you throw the bishop out there for a check. Now, okay. So I have two stories to tell you about this particular situation, and then we'll get on to the content. So Kotov, I have a story about Kotov. I never met Kotov, but he has a great book called The Art of the Middle Game. It's Art of the Middle Game by Alexander Kotov. And the last time I checked, it was only in descriptive notation, but you might be able to find it in the New Algebraic. But you have to look it up. So I was at the U.S. Amateur Team East, which is a team tournament here in the U.S., and I wanted to buy that book for my student. So there were 2 booksellers at the Amateur Team East. There was the Rochester Chess Center, which was like the new age bookseller, the people who were sort of up to date. And then there was a bookseller that had mostly older books. So I thought, the new bookseller, I'm going to check, but he's not going to have it. It's an old book. The Art of the Middle Game, he's not going to have it. But, so I'm at the U.S. Amateur Team. So I go to this, the new bookseller didn't have it, although I checked. So I go to the old bookseller who had mostly old books. And I said, sir, excuse me, do you have this book by The Art of the Middle Game by Alexander Kotov? And he must have been a product of like the Fischer movement or something. You know, he's an older guy. I actually think it was, what's that guy's name? And anyway, so he goes, we don't sell KGB books here. Very rudely, we don't sell KGB books here. And I was like, okay, so you don't sell KGB books here, so I'll just order it off Amazon for $12, And okay, so that's my brief run-in with, or my Kotov story. Now, my bishop to b5 check story is funnier because I played bishop to b5 check in quite a number of tournament games. One of them was against Larry Gilden, famous legend of American chess, FIDE master Larry Gilden. And I played him at the Eastern Open in Washington, D.C. And this isn't a real tournament. You have to understand, we're talking about a 5-hour time control, in a game. Like, the game could go 5 hours. We're talking about slow chess. It's quiet. You can hear a pin drop. It's serious, right? And so he played d6. We had played once before, and I won. And he played d6. I played, and he's got these big bushy eyebrows, Larry Gilden. He's got almost a cartoon-like face, and he's in his 70s now. And he's sitting at the board, and he's got his head down like this. And remember, there's like 300 people in this tournament hall. It's quiet. We're playing a serious game of chess. 2 masters are playing a serious game of chess against each other. So I play bishop to b5 check, and he yells, "Is that checkmate?" And then he immediately goes knight to d7. And all of the people in the area looked at my game. This is only move 3 of the game. He yells, after bishop to b5 check, "Is that checkmate?" And then he immediately goes knight to d7. And then it caused like a crowd to form, even though it was only like 5 minutes into the game. Okay, and so that's my story about bishop to b5 check. Is so funny. This funny guy Larry Gilden, who's a real character. He actually told me to accept a draw in a position. He also told me to accept a draw in a position that he claimed to have studied with Fischer that he knew was a draw, but I ended up beating him in that game. And he likes to talk during the games. But anyway, I remember that's my experience. It reminded me of playing bishop to b5 check. Actually, I went on to lose that game after bishop to b5 check. So he got me back, but it was more of a comedy show. I think everyone at the table had a very light laugh at Gilden's comment. Is that checkmate? And then he played knight to d7, which is what Kotov played in the game. And this is considered, of course, the most combative way to play, because you're not allowing any pawn structure damage, but you're also not allowing a bishop for bishop exchange. You're basically saying, hey, if you want to exchange your bishop for the knight, then I will have the two bishops, and I have something to play for. We have a dynamic position. We're playing for something different. So d4 was played. This is all theory, even to this day, although this game was played in 1940. Knight to f6, bishop to g5, queen to a5, knight c3. Now, I'm not fond of the move queen to a5 check, because to me that only helps white develop. So we look at this position, and white's got this, both knights in the game, and more central space. The fact that the queen is in the middle is not extremely relevant here. There's no easy way to harass the queen with your pieces. So a6 was played, and I really like Kotov's move here. He played b4. And he's just gaining more space in the position, so I like that. Queen goes back to d8. He plays bishop takes f6. And the reason why he played bishop takes f6 here is with the knight on d7 being in a pin, this forces black to weaken their pawn structures. You either have to take like this or like this. So Kotov took toward the center. Now it's not exactly the safest thing to castle to the king side. He trades off the bishop and then plays knight to d5. I really like the move knight to d5. This is a good positional move, but it's also a prophylactic move. Here's what I mean. What does black want to play? Black wants to play e6, where the pawns would cover all the central squares from the knights, and then black would, in my opinion, might even have the better game there if he can achieve the move e6 easily. Like, for example, let's say a castle. e6 is played. It's not easy for white to play here, because black's going to play bishop to c6, bishop to e7, rook to g8, and yes, black's king is in the middle, but it's surrounded by a glob of pawns that you can't really break down. So Lilenthal was aware of that, and he played knight to d5 as to make it difficult for Kotov to develop. Here's why. e6 now loses a pawn, a very critical pawn, and of course weakens the king. King would have to move here. So at least for the moment, black's development of the king's bishop is not going to be very easy. So black played b5. I don't like this move, but I think he didn't want the knight to sit in on the b6 square either, so he played b5. And if white goes knight to b6 now, he just drives the knight out of there with rook to b8. But, okay, knight h4 was played. Again, very alert was Lilenthal. He knew that, okay, I'm stopping e6. So now if I could sit my knight in on f5, black would be totally paralyzed. I mean, the bishop on f8 would have a crazy time getting out of the position. So rook c8 was played, knight to f5, and yes, that means that white hasn't castled yet, but he's played very principled moves, preventing black from concluding in any development. right? But white can castle on the next turn. White's going to be able to castle. Rest assured. So black took, white took, and this is a disaster for black. Because black can't move their pieces. There's one thing black has going for them, and that's the c-file. There is a backwards pawn on the c-file. But in fact, if I were playing white and Lilenthal did this, I would castle and offer this pawn, because it is actually in this position, it would actually be white who seizes control of the open file. And after an exchange of rooks, despite the fact that white has lost the c-pawn, it's actually only helped white, because white's pieces are ready to infiltrate the position. Black isn't castled, the bishop's blocked, so white's practically winning here. I mean, black has nothing to do. So black castled. White played rook to e1. Now that's a tempo gaining move because we're threatening the pawn on e7. Rook e8 was played, guarding it. But you can see, really, once again, we have a dominant knight here in the center working against a very bad bishop on g7. So rook e2. It's a simple move. Defend the pawn on e2 and prepare to double and attack the backwards pawn on e7. Rook c6. Rook f. I think rook f to e1 would have also been good. Toeless sloth. e5. This was part of Kotov's plan. En passant. En passant. And after all of these trades, the material is even, but you just look at the position, you realize while material might be even, the position is not even. Okay? The position is not even at all because white is just completely dancing around the black position. The pawn structure is in shambles. Black's king, in respect to white's king, is a lot weaker. Now, black is threatening back rank checkmate, but white's going to see that. That's too much of a beginner threat. Lilenthal's going to see that. So he kills two birds with one stone, or as the PETA crew says, feeds two birds with one scone, with queen to e3. So queen e3 stops back rank checkmate, but also threatens rook to e8, winning the queen. On top of that, you get out of any potential discoveries toward your queen, because your queen was on d4. So you do a lot of things with the move queen to e3. So you stop mate, you threaten mate and winning the queen, and you get out of any potential attacks that may have been possible on the queen. So king f8, stopping the fork. And then white plays a logical move here, but a necessary one. So he goes h4. And that gives the king the necessary luft he needs to make sure that, we don't have to babysit the back rank threat for the rest of eternity. So he just covers that. And I like the move h4 versus the standard h3 or g3 because h4, we cannot forget that pawns can be attacking units as well. So this pawn, in addition to allowing the king the freedom of a flight square, the pawn can also run down and cause a disturbance to the black king side, which is already completely fractured. So pawns are attacking units too. So I like h4 versus some standard moves. So h5 was played. Black didn't want to allow that to happen, but of course that's more time consumed. So in this position, rook e7 was played. The idea is queen to e6 coming in for checkmate, and black can hardly do anything about that. So he played queen to c8, and I would like for the chat to tell me what move did white play here which caused black to resign. And my hint to you is keep it simple. So white to play, make Kotov resign, make the leader of the KGB resign, and keep it simple. That's my hint. Keep it simple. So here's what was played in the game. Rook a7. The other, in my opinion, Queen a7 was also very strong because you're loading up on this, doubling on the 7th rank, and Queen g3 is also okay, but after check, King h2, and Queen g4, you're probably going to have to trade queens. And, you don't want to trade queens because, like, you're attacking, so you don't want to trade queens, even if you have the better position. So, simple rook to a7 with the idea of queen to e7 followed by queen to just getting down to the 7th rank. Here, the check doesn't do anything. There's no further check, and the queen's coming in. So what happened in the game was after rook a7, since the threat was queen to e7, if queen to d8, now, which stops here, now you have two options. You have queen e6, which is simple, threatening mate. If queen to e8, stopping mate, you can of course play queen takes queen and then take a free bishop. But I would advise you against that because you've got the guy in total disarray here. I would actually play the move knight to e7 here, threatening queen to g8 checkmate, which is a beautiful, beautiful move. And you're just pouncing upon a very, very, very fragile and weak king here. So this would just be the best way to finish. I mean, this would be one of those moments where, it's one of those moments, if you have a good move, look for a better one. Trading queens and winning a piece is certainly not bad, but you got the guy totally dead to rights. And when you see the move knight e7, you just realize that the game is over. Okay, so here we go. So d4, knight f6 by Keres, always a fighter, Keres. c4, e6, knight to f3, and once again, b6. Who remembers what this is called? The Queen's Indian Defense. Exactly. Queen's Indian Defense. Once again, we see this very popular opening, and of course the idea is to fianchetto the Queen's bishop and try to, it's a hyper-modern opening. The idea is to try to influence the center with your pieces as opposed to just throwing your pawns out there. So, g3, bishop to b7, bishop to g2. By the way, this game is following our first game, Lilenthal Beat. Okay, so bishop to e7, castles, knight to c3, knight e4. This is, so far, it's the exact same game as the first game I showed you today. Queen c2, takes. Okay, here, Keres played possibly an improvement. He played bishop to e4. I like this move. Why? Because the idea of this move is to get the bishop on the outside of the pawns and go c6 and d5, and then the bishop can shift to this diagonal. Okay, so Lilenthal adopted the same strategy as he did before. Knight e1, trade the bishops, and then, just playing this position, maybe trying to get a little bit more space in the middle. c6 was played by Keres. The idea of the move pawn to c6 is to play the move d5, bolstering the center. Now, what did Lilenthal play here? And I love this move. It is not obvious, though. What did Lilenthal play? So I want to hear from the chat. There are about 70 of you out there. So what do you think white played. And maybe you've picked up some hints about how our man of the hour played. He loved preventing his opponent's ideas. If he could, of course. You can't lose things on purpose to prevent, but he tried to. Yeah, so actually, no, e4 is okay, but it sort of falls into black's plans. c5 I think is interesting, but it's not the correct, he played d5. I love this move. I love this move because it stops black from playing d5, and a double capture, which looks like it wins a pawn, does not win a pawn. In fact, it just weakens the pawn structure. White can play knight f4 here. White will regain the pawn, and imagine this type of situation. White has regained the pawn, and white has the healthier pawn structure. Black has an isolated d-pawn. White has the half-open d-file, so it's almost a backwards pawn at this point. With the knight sitting on d5 outpost, he can just pile up on the d-file against that weakened pawn. So I really love the move d5 played by Lilenthal because he just stops black from playing d5, and he knows black isn't going to take... Black cannot really take twice because that would leave black with a positional weakness, and it's not like black wins a pawn here. White's going to get that pawn back. So Keres did take with the c-pawn, but then he played knight to a6 in an effort to just work around this pawn for the moment, and of course can bring the rook to the c-file. Knight f4 was played. I like that move. Keeps an eye out on the d-pawn. He would love it if black traded for the same reasons as before. Backwards pawn, isolated pawn, beautiful knight here on d5. Can't really be dislodged. So queen c8 was played, and queen f3 was played. I like the move queen f3. I don't really like to trade in this type of position. I think that it's more important to keep the pieces on. It's probably a preference thing. I don't think it's right or wrong. Queen c2. Pawn to e4, bolstering the center, gaining more space. Pawn to e5 was played, and knight to d3. Okay, so right now, I wouldn't say anything major is happening, but I like knight to d3, attacking this pawn. And what knight to d3 also does is guards the b pawn. And that's important because white wants to develop this bishop, but doesn't want to lose the pawn. So now white's free to develop the bishop. On top of that is once the bishop gets developed, white will look to drive the queen out of the position by playing rook to c1. So the ability to move the bishop means a lot. f6, knight to e1, get the queen out, and then the knight goes to, I like this, the knight goes to g2 just to try to relocate itself over there. So the queen's out of c2, but, the position remains complicated. Bishop to e3, rook c8, and now we have a trade. So what's great about this situation is how surprised I was when I saw what happened in the game and how wrong I was about my initial impression of this position. Who do you think is better? Who do you think has the better game in this position? Yeah, so let's call it even. Let's say, based on a sample size of 16, that this chat is split evenly between preferring white, preferring black. Okay. When I saw this position, I was like, well, black has the open file. That matters in chess. So I was like, black has the open file, and, that has to be in black's favor. And then, but it is actually white who has the better game but it's due to one deep idea and one not deep idea. Okay, so the not deep idea is that because black has played the move f6, and the knight on a6 is, at least for the moment, out of play, white has attacking chances on the king side. So this is the simple idea. White can play the knight into f5 square, knight f5, and drive the king side pawns into the black king position and attack the king. So yes, black has the file, but black is whiffing on that file. There's nothing to attack there. And so it's merely symbolic that at this moment, black has the open file, when white can play knight e3, get the knight into f4, get the queen to g4, play the pawn up, and white has attacking chances. So that is, I would say, the easier idea to understand. The deeper idea is that after knight e3, white can take back the file, which is something I didn't even really consider when I first looked at the position. If black's only asset is the open file, which doesn't do him any good right now because he doesn't really have anything to attack once he gets down the open file, but if that's his only asset and white can take it away from him, then black really has nothing because black still has to reckon with the attack on the king. Again, the knight on a6 is sort of out of play. White can challenge the c-file thanks to this knight by going like that. And you're like, yeah, but that's never going to happen. Watch. It's so beautiful how Lilenthal plays this game. He controls both sides of the chessboard. He already dominates the king side. He's going to play, again, he's got all the action on the king side. He's got the space in the center, and he's got action on the king side. What's amazing is how he controls both the king side, and he seizes control of the open file, and eventually he takes over both wings of the board. So upon a closer inspection or a deeper inspection, it is actually white who's better because the control of the c-file by black is symbolic, and white has attacking chances against the king. So king h8, queen to g4. Okay, that does attack the pawn. Rook c7, rook to d1. And we see that black is trying to maneuver, but white is actually the one who's taking over the file. So that changed pretty quickly. With some maneuvering, it was actually white who took over the file, which is like, what? So, okay, rook to d8, h4, again, controlling both wings. White's like, hey, Keres, I might jam that pawn in your king side. Don't go to sleep over on that king side. Oh, but also, I'm over here on your queen side too. I've got a battery on the c-file ready to let loose on you. So I'm hitting you on both wings. On top of that, this pawn wedge stops the knight from getting to the promised land, which would be d4. I just don't see any real way for the knight to get to d4. You know, I just don't see an avenue for that knight to get there. So the space in the center helps white too. Okay, so queen f8. White shifts the knight back to e3, unleashing the battery, but also eyeballing the king. We have a captures, trade of the rooks, and now white, the way this was played is incredible to me. It's you know, I don't want to say it's masterly because, of course, Lilenthal in 1950, when FIDE came up with the Grandmaster titles, he was instantly awarded the Grandmaster title in 1950, the same year that the Grandmaster title was invented. So to say he conducted himself in a masterful way, that's implied. But the beauty of the way he painted his perfect picture here was just awesome. So queen f3, keeping black guessing on the king side. King g7, knight to g4. Again, simple threats, direct threats, but valid. Queen f8, h5. I love this move h5 because, I mean, it's got a threat. He wants to go h6 check and then take the pawn on f6 once the king goes away. So Carrez took, but now he gets the f5 square for himself. So the king side has been compromised. White's pieces, even though it's just an army of 2, is very powerful here. And of course, this knight on b8, sad participant, if you want to even call it a participant. d6, knight f5 check, king to g6, and now, because white dominates with their pieces and dominates both sides of the board, queen to c3, shifting back to the queen side for infiltration, knight a6 to stop queen c7, queen c6, just getting in there, knight c5, pawn to f3, guarding the e-pawn, just dominating completely, knight to d3, queen c7, and like the everything's just collapsing. The whole queen side cannot be kept together, and the queen on f8 has to guard the g7 square, so she can never run free. So after b5 and queen takes a7, Carrez resigned because he can't move. And when you can't move in a chess game, that's not good, especially if it's not stalemate. When you can't move, but you have moves, that's not good. That's called Zugzwang. That means you're screwed in German. No, I'm just kidding. It's a moment in chess where you have legal moves to make, but they're just all bad. Okay. So black is a sitting duck here because you cannot escape the assault on the king. Just for your curiosity, what do you think? Material is even. The material is even. What do you think the computer's evaluation is of this Zugzwang position? What do you think it is? +3, +2, -5. What do you think it is? Remember, plus means in white's favor, minus means in black's favor. We already know it's not in black's favor, so go ahead and say plus whatever. Plus whatever. Yeah, it's +9. Few of you got it. It's +9. Let me tell you what that means with human words. Let me tell you what that means in human words. +9 from the computer's standpoint is that what the computer is telling us is that at some point, what the computer is telling us is white is effectively up a queen. Even though white isn't up a queen, the computer is saying within its depth, white is up a queen. Which means if you play this out, the best black is going to have is giving away the queen, which means eventually, beyond the depth of the computer, you'll eventually win. But if you're up a queen, you win. Okay, so it's not surprising that that's the case. It just, the reason why Carrez resigned, even though it appears as though it's inconclusive, the position should keep going, it's just basically he's out of moves. He's like, I'm out of things to do. And white's plan, in my opinion, if you're looking for a plan, is quite easy. You go a4, and then you just push your a-pawn up the board. Like, what is black going to do? I mean, that's what I would do. I think if I'm looking for a plan and the computer goes here, I would go a4. And then after a trade, I'm just marching this pawn up, and if the queen ever leaves, I checkmate him. Hi, I'm Peter Giannatos, founder of the Charlotte Chess Center. Subscribing to our YouTube channel is statistically proven to limit your blunders.